So this presentation kind of deconstructs the water crisis in China. Before moving on, I want to make clear that China ranks 4th in the world in terms of total water resources, but is 2nd lowest in terms of per capita water resource availability. So that is the central problem going into this. Okay. It's often referred to as the triple threat by many researchers, which consists of flooding, primarily in the southern regions of China, water shortages, which I'll get into, and contamination by industrial pollution. And this contamination is pretty much a result of industrial pollution, but additionally it can result from high levels of arsenic in the ground, and so I'll get into that as well. On the right you see, this is an image, pollution in Tai Lake. So I mean, it's pretty bad. And the left, I think that's, let's see, it's a flood peak in the Hubei province. So, okay, this is just a quick breakdown. 78% of the water demand right now is for agricultural purposes. So on like privately owned land and in general cash crop production. 18% of the demand is for industrial use, and 5% is for domestic. Domestic is including private farms and livestock consumption. And I mean, this graph just clearly portrays the problem, the lack of available water. You know, interestingly, Brazil has the highest amount of, that's meters cubed per person per year, but I mean, it's a problem. Okay, and this is very basic, just the domestic demand. What it entails is household consumption, public consumption in markets and other state-owned facilities, and livestock, as I mentioned before. Okay. So this is industrial demand. I list the economic reforms of 1970s and 1980s because these are kind of the building blocks of what eventually spurred mass urbanization and industrialization. So you'll get like urbanization in the sense that the rural populations are slowly decreasing, and therefore industries are kind of expanding. Some industries which were expanding at the time were the food and beverage industries, power plants, and mining facilities. So these are kind of things that really depend on the availability of clean water. And right now, as the next slide will show, contamination is really playing a part in the economic well-being of these kind of industries. Oh no. Agricultural demand. So this breaks down into rain-fed agricultural uses. So, I mean, obviously, these kind of uses are not dependent on irrigation infrastructure, but nonetheless, I mean, this is kind of more dependent on rain, obviously, but it's not as much in the control of the government or any other institution. However, irrigated agriculture can be facilitated by the government. It covers 56% of total arable land and provides 67% of China's total green output. These are just some cropping intensities. Essentially what this is illustrating is that the northern region of China is kind of suffering more than the southern region. We have 135% cropping intensity in the north. So really there's a deficiency of water primarily in this northern region. And that's what I think needs further exploration. This is really, I think, the largest of the three problems I listed earlier, water contamination, because really it's a result of many things. It's a result of industrialization, it's a result of natural occurrences. I said before, arsenic contamination of groundwater, which causes, you know, many health-related issues and can theoretically also kind of be a detriment to crop production. Spread of algae, that's also a big problem in lakes, and in fact, let's see, there's a Lake Taihu, which is the third largest freshwater lake in China, which was recently taken over by algae. So I mean, I'm not entirely sure how one can control that, but it's definitely a factor. And as I said before, industrialization, I guess another component of that could be, power plants, toxic spills could really affect the nature of the environment. In 2006, 60% of China's rivers, this data was taken in 2006, I guess, but 60% of China's rivers cannot be used for drinking water. And China's population is 1.3 billion. This is definitely kind of not a plus. Water shortages, the reason why I talk about this after contamination is because I think that they're very closely related, and I think contamination can often cause these water shortages. But if you refer to this map here, essentially this is saying that physical water scarcity, I mean, centrally located in China, economic water scarcity as well. And currency policy failures in China's water management. So these are really things that the government can help out with, and I think that they're playing a very reserved role right now. And that is underdeveloped system of water rights administration, weakness in water demand control, lack of market-based tools, insufficient financing for pollution control. So I don't know if the government is really observing this as top of priorities, but in short, there is a lack of infrastructure for controlling sewage and things like that, which I'll get to. Interesting fact, China has the same amount of water as Canada, but with a population 100 times greater. So that's kind of a characterization of the magnitude of this water crisis. Okay, this is Jia Feshen. She wrote an article, The Rural-Urban Population Shift in China, and this table is taken directly from what she wrote. But ultimately, I just want you to see that clearly urbanization from the 1950s up until projected 2087 is increasing dramatically, and this is not really helpful in terms of the availability of drinking water, because as populations become condensed in these kind of urban settings, and drinking water is only available in 40% of the rivers, there's often, and as we can see now, a scarcity. This is a possible cause for the deficiency of drinking water. A 1996 data report says that more than 20 billion tons of urban sewage was discharged into rivers, lakes, etc. So lack of infrastructure kind of corresponds to this, in the sense that the government really hasn't worked out plausible ways of dealing with managing kind of sewage. And additionally, a cool cultural fact, spitting on sidewalks can contribute to sewage overflow, because it's just kind of a cultural thing. People like to spit on the sidewalks, and then the rain kind of drives it into the ground. And interesting, the government has not dampened this at all, so it's still, I mean, it's not necessarily a huge factor, but interesting. So in effect, drinking water does not meet governmental standards. That's the bottom line. So what? I'll start with the economic effects, because this whole project is kind of centered around Goldman Sachs and the BRICS acronym. So this water scarcity causes a loss of about $11.2 billion in industrial output. So in moving forward, in maintaining sustainable development, this scarcity, I think, has to be dealt with. And then kind of more relevant to the population, health-related effects. Liver and stomach cancer deaths have doubled since the 1970s. Not directly a result of contamination in water, but I think there's definitely a common thread there. And China has the highest liver cancer rate in the world. And then, I've said this time and time again, this poisoning coming from contaminated kind of wells and common sources of water for villages. And that's it.